so that regulation can be complied with, find the incentives and a better communication of what is the environment about. I can tell you that for my state, when people saw me as the Minister of Environment, I was addressed as the dustbin lady. So how do I get beyond just environmental sanitation and communicate this really well? It is a real issue, and I hope that we can do that. We also have to look at some of the programs that government has got in environment. Many of them, there are duplications. There are many sectors that we have to bond with and collaborate in a much more real way. Agriculture, for instance, when we talk about the Great Green Wall, which is a continental ambition of the African Union, what is Nigeria's contribution to that? How do we make a green wall not just about planting trees? How do we empower communities about that? Look at the kind of economic trees that we could put in place with short-term returns and longer-term investments for water, for irrigation, for the full value chain of agriculture, for instance.
The education of the Nigerian people or reorientation of the Nigerian people might be another solution that your ministry might have to look at. Would you be looking at educational curriculum, including green education in the educational curriculum of the different schools as we move forward? Then the laws you talked about. Are you lobbying the National Assembly to ensure that they work on these laws?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of convincing that's got to be done now. A lot of it's about communication and education, so I do think a key partner will be the education sector, particularly at the local government and the state level. But I think it would also need an education within our public service. I think we also need that within business. We also need that within the political elite. Certainly the National Assembly and the chairpersons I have in the 4 committees, both at the Senate and at the House, and I will say including the Senate President, who was a chair of the Environment Committee, there's a better understanding than there was before, and what we want to do is to deepen that. So I think we find all sorts of vehicles and means to deepen the knowledge that we need to get people on board. People have to embrace and engage with what is very real, and that's climate change and what the environment, how we are degrading the environment to a large degree with where we need not to.
Yes,
so I think that's important, and I think the curriculum will see the insertion of climate change and environment.
Okay, you've mentioned the oil spillage in the Niger Delta region, and of course there's been talk about the cleanup, which some people have said it could take up to 30 years. But while we're looking at cleanup, what are we doing in terms of making sure that there's not more spillage there?
Sorry, what was the last part of that? Why are we doing?
What are we doing to ensure that while we're looking at cleaning up, what are we doing to ensure that we don't have more oil spillage?
It's quite difficult. I've always said that unless you find alternatives to some of the challenges that we have, they're not sustainable. Part of the context of setting the Sustainable Development Agenda and its goals is always to look at root causes. And at the same time we are taking action for the challenges that we see immediately, we need to have a parallel track of finding the incentives. In the Niger Delta, I think quite clearly we have to find better regulation and compliance of the oil companies for the spills that happen, and they have to be made responsible for that. They come into our environment clean, they have to leave it clean. In terms of the community, we have to acknowledge that we are a great part of what is happening to breaking pipelines and to the oil spills that are happening. And for that, we have to find alternatives for people of that region who actually hold all this wealth. And I think that, again, government has to provide the enabling environment so that our young people can be engaged in part of that value chain of both upstream and downstream activities of the oil sector. We have to find incentives for them to want to protect the environment, and I think that we find many activists down there trying to do it, but the tension is between those who are trying to do the right thing and those who need a livelihood today. So I think a better understanding of the incentives we need to move them from a livelihood that is damaging and actually allowing no future for their communities to one that makes that so. So investments by states and the federal government for a plan for that. We intend to start very soon in the new year the cleanup of the Niger Delta with the landmark decision that was taken on Shell and in Ogoni land. I hope that will be the beginning of us beginning to pay attention to this. I was in Imo State. I happened to be there when there was an oil spill by one of the oil companies. It was really quite a challenge to see how the state governor was trying to get the attention of the oil company, even on that specific oil spill. And yet young people were taking to the streets there to bring attention around that oil spill. Now, they have to have a response to these kind of things, but at the same time, we also have to see the revenues and programs and support to communities to make sure that our young people are engaged. Clearly, the youth that I saw there are not engaged and they need jobs. But I also saw oil spills there that need not have happened, and when they do happen, what is the reaction of the oil company to being open and transparent about how far wrong that has gone? Accidents happen, but you've got to deal with them in a way that protects our environment and our people.
Obviously, there has to be a deeper working relations between your ministry and the Ministry of Petroleum. How's that going to work out?
Sorry, I missed that.
I said your working relationship with the Ministry of Petroleum that's supervising the international oil companies, how's that going to work out so that they begin to hold them accountable for their activities in the various locations where they are?
Well, our agency, NOSDRA, works very closely with them and is embedded there. And I think that our relationship with the Ministry of Petroleum is good. It could be better. I think as with all sectors, there's overlapping. Sometimes there are tensions in trying to carry out the services that we do in terms of regulating what happens. And we're hoping that we can have a much better multi-sectoral approach to what's happening with the environment, particularly as it affects oil spills, but also as it affects other pollution from industry. We have to do better at that, and we're working to see how we can do that. We've just started. As I said, I really do see the budget of 2016 as one of engaging and laying down a roadmap over the next 4 years that we have, but well into the future, 2030, 2050, to make sure that the responses that and investments that we put in over the next 4 years are sustained.
Let me ask you about this one that your ministry is overseeing. That's the Ecological Fund. Many Nigerians have talked about the fact that no one knows what's going on with the Ecological Fund. The environment is decaying, the erosion sites all over the country, the greenery is being lost across the country, and yet you're still talking about revamping the environment. What's the state of the Ecological Fund?
I didn't quite get the question, but I got what was all the things that are happening. I think that we must be much more transparent about what we are doing, what is happening, and be very clear about the roles and responsibilities of every stakeholder, be it government, business, parliamentarians, and the communities themselves. Again, the communication aspect of this, we cannot underestimate the importance of it. One of the key partners we will have is the Ministry of Communication. But in terms of the ministry, I think we will start from our budget this year and be very clear about what it is we intend to attain within the transition. It is not a huge budget, but is a budget that we can make a difference with. I will also say that in terms of financing, we need to use our resources better to leverage other people's actions and leverage actions from resources in the states and the local government towards the same destination. In other words, if we want to build the Great Green Wall, we must look at the overlaps and the duplication and be more efficient about how we're going to attain that. We can't do that without being transparent about our budgets. We can't do that without being transparent about what donors and multilateral institutions are bringing into our country. So transparency and accountability are going to be a big part of this, and finding ways of communicating. Another part of it is establishing a list of indicators that you out there can use to see if we're getting results. I think social media has been one of the most interesting parts of my last few weeks in government. I've learned a lot about the expectations of Nigerians, but I've also seen many, many issues that have been brought forward with solutions. So I think, we have to find better ways of making sure that we can respond to what the general public is expecting.
Okay, now let me take you quickly to the issue of the sustainable agenda. How well do you think this can be incorporated into the national plan?
Could you repeat that? Because that just went.
I'm talking about the sustainable agenda for the environment. How well do you think this can be incorporated into the national plan that we have?
Well, first, I think, I mean, we certainly have a change agenda, and we're one of the 6 pillars of that. I think my concern now would be to make sure that the national plan that we have is upgraded. We have 2020. We need to see 2030, so a longer time frame. We also need to see a better coherence and collaboration on how our INDCs and the agenda of the Ministry of Environment fit into the longer term plan. I think if we start to put these as appendages or add-ons to the national plan, we will fail. If we're talking about a green economy and environment being relevant, then it's got to be an integral part of the plan. So seeing how we have the change agenda reflected in the next year 15-year plan, and I would hope that we could legislate that plan, because we really need a roadmap for Nigerians, that whatever administration comes in place, that we are just building and going milestone by milestone till we get to a 2030 or a 2050. I think that one of the challenges that we've had is that every time we have an administration, we are rolling back some of the successes and starting all over again. So in terms of the national plan, I'd like to see the timeline extended, the integration based on the sustainable development concept. So therefore, all the 17 sustainable development goals, which include 3 that are directly responsive to climate change and environment, and 11 otherwise, would be integrated into that. Plans of countries need to lead the agenda. Domestic resources need to drive that, and we need to leverage support from the international community to make sure we meet those ambitions.
Hajia Amina Mohammed, if you leave after your tenure as the Minister of Environment, what would you want Nigerians to remember you for?
I'd love for them to remember me for doing 3 things. Taking very serious actions and getting results in empowering people, in taking climate action, not just addressing climate change, but taking climate action that has results in their lives, and in putting in place the regulations that will enforce and incentivize protecting our environment. At the end, it'll be people's judgment of what we do, but what we're aiming to do is to put words into action, is to be the change that we would like to see in our lives and for the rest of people, and really take everyone with us. Just leaving no one behind.
Thank you very much. We wish you well in your endeavors and hope the plans come to fruition real quickly too. We'll be speaking to Hajia Amina Mohammed, Minister of the Environment, Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you. Sunrise Daily will be back. Sunrise will be back in a moment. Please don't go away.